Now, so having now finished that book, it is very clear that the Jewish question has not been solved yet. It has not been solved. In fact, it has very much evolved into what I term the Zionist problem. Now, why do I call it a problem as opposed to a question? Because what the Zionist problem has done, in effect, is distort the Jewish question in a way that has exacerbated imperialism to such an extent that terrible way of putting it, but if you wait a moment, I will explain why it's not what it sounds like. Zionism created the demon that Hitler feared. Now, I am not a Nazi. Obviously, I am not an ethnic anti-Semite or a racial anti-Semite. I believe that there is a bit of a problem with meshing those two terms of race and ethnicity. And ethnicity is not something that is static and genetic, it is something that is cultural, whereas race is like genetic. That's the way I consider it anyway, it's more helpful. So, what exactly do I mean by that? So, let's really try to unpack that a bit. And I think it is pretty simple for starters to look to the lobbies. Now, I think it is not unrealistic to say that the lobbies, in a sense, have control of governments. However, what should not be stated, what should not be taken as a conclusion from that is that the Jews have control of the government. So these days, when I use the term Zionism, I am distinguishing between Zionism and Judaism. The Zionism is less an ideology of Jews, even if the majority of Jews support it. That is starting to change. Zionism, in effect, or modern Zionism, I should say. Modern Zionism is simply the modern character of capitalist imperialism. And there is a sense in which religious eschatology also plays into things here. There is a way in which, a very obvious way, if you really think about it, in which the religious eschatology of the three major Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all playing a role in this ascendant new form of imperialism. Now, I may be making the exact same mistake that Karl Kautsky made, which perhaps I should self-criticize a little bit on that. This is a framework in progress. Like, I may be making the same mistake with one notion here that Karl Kautsky made with his notion of what was it, ultra imperialism or something like that. And that's basically like the notion of like capitalism culminating in like a union of national trusts or something into like a kind of thing. And a lot of that is something to be debated and self-criticized a little bit. So I probably do need to look into that as I keep going. This is just a framework I've got developed. So the hypothesis, which I'm basically calling uh, geopolitical eschatology. It is an attempt that I am making to basically try and explain the dialectical relationship between Abrahamic eschatology or between particular interpretations of Abrahamic eschatology of all three major religions and modern geopolitics. And central to this is basically the premise that the previous economic base of imperialism, of Anglo-American imperialism, which created the state of Israel as an extension of itself, has also created an ideological superstructure which is based on Abrahamic eschatology. And that said Abrahamic eschatology, or said ideology based on it, I shouldn't say the eschatology itself, but this version of this ideological eschatology, this part of the superstructure, has in dialectical fashion imposed itself onto the base in a way that is leading to a self-fulfillment of the particular interpretation of Abrahamic eschatology in a materialist and geopolitical form, and one which is turning out to be extremely dangerous. So, what are the three general interpretations that I am thinking about here? So, for Judaism, for the Jewish side of the Jewish part of that sort of triumvirate, religious Zionism, the ideology that is effectively undergirding the Greater Israel Project. This and other things like the Temple Institute. Basically, this idea that the state of Israel needs to expand its borders to the biblical borders of Israel. These are the borders that are in the thumbnail there. So going all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates. Yeah. So very, very big expanse of land. All of Jordan, all of Lebanon, all of historic Palestine, like a massive chunk out of Saudi Arabia, a massive chunk out of Iraq and Syria, like the Sinai Peninsula. Yeah, like a very big swath of land. Like it's going to be like at least 15 times the size of like current sort of Israel-Palestine. But that and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem will lead to the Jewish Messiah. Or in this case, I would say the Zionist Messiah, not so much the Jewish Messiah. Because I would say that there is a bit of a distinction to be made between the two, given that the Zionist Messiah would very much be kind of like a Jewish Hitler. As ironic as that sounds, it would very much be like a Jewish Hitler, like a dictator who is particularly murderous. So, because this would be emerging from like a far right Jewish fascism. So that is like the Jewish element. The Christian element, I'm not exactly 100% certain of at this point in time. However, it is in curious alignment with Christian Zionism. So it is essentially like Christian Zionism, but a bit different. And really, to understand this kind of the Christian part of that, we have to also understand the Islamic part of that, which they're pretty much identical. Like a common theme here that will be these three interpretations, they basically align. And the Islamic interpretation in question is that of Sheikh Imran Hussein. Basically, this idea of like a threefold empire theory leading up to the emergence of the Antichrist. Now, the Antichrist is in both Christian and in both the Christian and Islamic eschatology at play here. The Antichrist is the Jewish Messiah, or in this case, the Zionist Messiah, a false Messiah. Obviously, in Islam, it's called like the Dajjal or something, but basically Antichrist. Now, Imran Hussein's idea is basically that there is a threefold evolution of empires. There's like Pax Britannica, so the British Empire, which created the State of Israel, and Pax Americana, so the American Empire, or as I call it, the Anglo-American Empire, because there is some continuity there, as will be established in the imperialism unit as we go through that. That has basically facilitated the rise, the ascendancy of the State of Israel, to the point where it is trying to basically to facilitate Greater Israel and all this stuff that will fulfill these prophecies. Let me just. So um, so yeah, and the basically after a great war, like a World War III, if you will, the Pax Americana will give way to Pax Judaica. Basically like a global Zionist empire. And that is when the Antichrist will come. Now, that's a very interesting hypothesis, especially considering that we seem to be heading for a World War III. Now, I would have to reconsult the book of Revelation. As I said, this is all a framework in development. Um, but my suspicion is that basically the interpretation of Christian eschatology that would basically fit this framework is one where if we go for like the major elements of the end times prophecy, Babylon would be this Pax Judaica. That would pretty much be what it is. The Antichrist would be the future Zionist Messiah. The false prophet, which is sort of where it gets it into this stuff here. The false prophet would be the Silicon Valley tech oligarchy. And that is because the mark of the beast would be the global surveillance state that is currently being created. Now, global surveillance state does not mean in the sense of a literal one world government, but in the sense of these tech corporations basically like gaining a monopoly on all of the surveillance, like having all of this surveillance, basically spying on everybody, getting all their data, selling all their data, trying to control these social media algorithms to control what people can think, eventually, controlling money and stuff. If there is one thing that I have noticed, there's one thing that has become very, very apparent to me, that at least to some degree, when people on the right talk about stuff like digital ID, when they talk about stuff like central bank digital currencies and all of this sort of stuff, when they talk about stuff like Neuralink, if we're going to get a little bit more into the speculative territory, there is a massive, glaring modicum of truth to it all. For a very long time, the left was basically like, no, it's all just a conspiracy theory. Kind of. The modicum of truth exists. It is being taken in the wrong direction. Well, it's been taken to the wrong conclusions. It is not that it is not that the essence of this stuff about more surveillance and more like, the CBDC, the digital ID, all of this kind of stuff. It is literally being laid out right before our eyes. The universal basic income, the automation of labor. It is like with AI and stuff. It is all being done right in front of us. So to try and deny all of that is to ultimately cede ground to fascists who will capitalize on that, who will fearmonger on that, to blame scapegoats like globalists for it. And again, this globalism, I said that before while I was reading. This globalism is just trying to detach capitalism and imperialism from each other. It is trying to detach the two. They are inseparable. They are inseparable. They cannot be broken apart. And it basically goes into all of this where, yes, this global surveillance state, global per se, is being created in the sense where these tech billionaires are rolling out these softwares for age verification, for spying, for constant surveillance, for digital currencies, like all of this kind of stuff. I've seen WorldCoin brought up in a video. The WorldCoin being, was it Sam Altman who started that? All of this kind of stuff. These ideologies that are floating around in Silicon Valley. All of this is, in effect, a mark of the beast. It is, in effect, mark of the beast. That is what it is. a global surveillance state, global not in the sense of an actual global state, but in the sense of these corporations, this oligarchy, having basically global control. And what can be noticed when we really look at it, when we dig into it, all of these oligarchs are pro-Israel. All of these oligarchs are right in that Zionist thing, which is why I refer to a Zionist oligarchy. Technically, I should be referring to it as an imperialist oligarchy, but a Zionist oligarchy. It illustrates the point that is being created here, that the future of world imperialism, the future of world imperialism is inseparable from the Zionist problem. That is the essence of the Zionist problem. It is, or it's inseparable from the Jewish question. The future of world imperialism is inseparable from the Jewish question. It is inseparable from the state of Israel. And it is also inseparable from Abrahamic eschatology. It is all, like, as I said, this economic base, this economic base of capitalist imperialism created the state of Israel, Pax Britannica, and continued its ascendancy, Pax Americana, has created this eschatological ideology, this superstructure that is now imposing itself on the base, Pax Judaica, creating, like, basically forcing eschatological prophecies to come to pass in an imperialist form, or in a materialist form. In a materialist form. When I say materialist form, why do I say that? Because I don't think Jesus is coming back. That's why I say in a materialist form, because I don't think Jesus is coming back. No matter how much Christians or Muslims may have a problem with that, I don't think Jesus is coming back. I'm not going to rest. I'm not going to rest on my laurels, laying out in, like, most likely misplaced faith that some dude who died 2,000 years ago, I know the Muslims don't think he actually died, but who died, who was crucified 2,000 years ago for trying to overthrow the Romans, I am not going to rest on my laurels with complacent faith that some dude who was executed 2,000 years ago for wanting to overthrow the Romans to come back and save us. I think that is complacent. Look, believe it all you want. I don't care. But don't let it be a motivator of complacency. That is my main issue. If you act anyway, we're good. But if you treat that religious belief, that conviction, as a reason, as a motivator for complacency, all you are doing is proving Marx's point that religion is the opiate of the masses, that it is nothing more than a pacification device, that it is nothing more than a way for the ruling class, for the imperialist class, for the Zionist oligarchy to keep you pacified, to keep you from acting. Whether you believe it or not, I don't care. But if you use it for complacency, you are part of the problem. I thought I'd make that clear. Now, so if this Pax Judaica is like a next stage of imperialism, what is the solution? Well, if this eschatological superstructure has been imposed on the economic base and is forcing these biblical prophecies to come to pass in a materialist form, what is the solution? Simple. A materialist equivalent of the second coming. What is that materialist equivalent of the second coming? The world proletarian revolution. which, again, will resolve the Zionist problem, will resolve the Jewish question, will resolve many of these problems, because you have destroyed the basis from which you have destroyed the base from which all of this crap has arisen in the first place. It is really that simple. You have a materialist Perusia, a materialist second coming, and then you have a materialist kingdom of God, communism. It's really that simple. So now, am I saying, oh, because we should think about this eschatologically, should we see this as like inevitable? No, obviously not. In fact, I think we are running out of time, because I have a suspicion that if Pax Judaica is fully realized, this full automation of labor, this full automation of like this, this fully encompassing surveillance state with all of this stuff and the full automation of labor using AI. Once that happens, the proletariat loses the basis of its struggle, by which it can organize its class struggle. What power does the working class have if it can't go on a strike because it isn't needed anymore? It is destroying the basis of the proletariat. It is destroying the material social basis of the proletariat. And in doing so, all it is setting up is the eternal victory of the bourgeoisie. And call that defeatist. But I do think that we are running out of time. How much time we have, I have no idea. It is looking like we may be bought time by the fact that these, like, transformer large language models might be a bit of a dead end. But that is not going to stop them from continuing to try. And they may succeed. Do I think this is going to constitute like a one world government in the sense that like right wingers fear? No. Nation states will still exist. It is, and really, like, some people talk about like, oh, loss of national sovereignty. It's like nations already don't really have any sovereignty. Like Australia, for instance. People say, oh, we lost our national sovereignty. We never had sovereignty in the first place. We're a puppet of Britain first, and then now we're a puppet of America. All that'll change with Pax Judaica is that we'll be a puppet of Israel. Like, that's all that will change. It's just bouncing from empire to empire, remaining a sub-imperial power. And that'll be well referenced. Once I've gotten through this, when I go through this, nothing will change. Nothing will fundamentally change without a proletarian revolution. Without that, nothing changes. We don't gain any sovereignty at all whatsoever. None. And before you go, oh, tanky, I'm not a tanky. I'm not a Marxist-Leninist. I'm an actual communist. Because if Professor Jiang is to be taken at his word, China is caught up in this shit too. The supposed king of the socialist world right now is caught up in this crap. Is caught up in this crap because of some Ben Gurion canal plan that Israel has that's going to allow more trade. In other words, so China is is compromised as well. The supposed socialist paradise of China would also be caught up in this crap, would also be compromised. That's not communism. That's just more of the same crap. And Imran Hussein, he's spoken about Israel's goal basically being to plunge the superpowers into war so they can kill each other, so they can destroy each other, so that it can ascend and take their place. Now, how true is that going to be? Time will tell. But it's a possibility that has to be taken into consideration, in my view. Now, to address the elephant in the room, do I believe, all Jews are to blame for this? No. Of course not. That would be stupid. Do I think Judaism is to blame for this? I'm just going to say it? Yes. Yes. I do think that Judaism is to blame for this. However, I also think that Christianity and Islam also are to blame for this. This is not just the fault of the Jews. This is the fault of all the Abrahamic faiths, equally. So no, I'm not singling out Judaism. All three of them have created this mess that we are currently living in, where all of these violent prophecies, or particular interpretations of these violent prophecies, are being imposed onto the economic base in a way that, if we're not fucking careful, will end in nuclear war. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about this. This shit's dangerous because this could result in a nuclear war. Has anyone, look at the Samson option. They've talked about nuking the entire world if they get destroyed. Israel. About nuking the entire world. Sure, maybe, the Israeli Liberal Party or whatever the Liberal Party is called there, the centre-left party, maybe the Liberal or the Labour Zionists won't do it. Maybe Likud won't even do it. But do you think that messianic religious fanatics won't do it? When they have power? Do you think that a Pax Judaica that has messianic theocrats at the helm, that has tried to create, has a Zionist Messiah with nothing to lose and everything to gain according to some religious fanaticism, do you think they won't nuke the world? That's the problem. It is not just Judaism that has caused this. It is Christianity and Islam as well. Does that mean I believe, religion should be destroyed? Does it mean I'm an anti-theist? Kinda. Not really. Not in the sense that I think religion should be destroyed, but in the fact that I think religion should be defanged wherever possible. That the power of religious narratives like this is causing this kind of violent problem. And yes, I'm wearing a cross on my chest. Whoop-de-doo. Because I believe in the morality of Jesus to a great extent. That doesn't mean I think he rose from the dead. That doesn't mean I think he's going to come back and save us from this shit. I'm not complacent like that. So that's really all I wanted to get into with kind of digging into the weeds here. But this all had to be said. And, I'll probably write Substack articles on this in the future. I'm sure I will write Substack articles on this shit eventually. Maybe an entire book at some point. Who knows? I will need to revisit Revelation. It'll be good for me to read the Quran. All of this kind of stuff. I will look into this. But, it needs to be understood what's going on. And we need to have clarity if we are to overcome it. If we are to overcome the capitalist system, if we are to overcome imperialism, if we are to overcome the possible dystopia that is being hailed in, we must have clarity about the material basis of the material basis behind it and how that can be overcome, which is through communism. We should not be parading around with extravagant conspiracy theories about what do most of these conspiracy theories come down to? The exact same kind of eschatology that has created this mess in the first place. You want to look at the conspiracy theory version, It's the version where everything I just explained with regards to Christian eschatology in the West is taken literally. That's the conspiracy version, where it's all taken literally, where it's like, oh, literal, like literal mark of the beast and literal antichrist, whoever it might be. That's the problem. That's the problem. This eschatology that is being forced onto reality, that is being forced onto the base, and is creating the problem in the first place. It is a violent and vicious self-fulfilling prophecy. But that's about all I really had to say. So yeah, that's really all I had to say. Obviously, the streams next week. Next week uh, the you know continue reading this on Tuesday. I'll start playing Freedom Planet 2 on Thursday. And next Saturday I'll begin reading Ilan Pape's A Very Short History of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, so to further become acquainted with the history of Israel and Palestine and how that relates to the problems today. But yeah, very important things that we need to keep our eyes on, that we need to make sure that we understand, so that we can overcome them. So it is really as simple as that. But yeah, that's really all she wrote. So I'll see you guys next time.